Welcome. This is the Free Market Roadshow, probably the largest annual series of public conferences on economics. Remarkable experts are discussing the challenges and providing libertarian solutions to today's problems. Organized by the Austrian Economic Center in cooperation with select institutes, universities and think tanks, the Free Market Roadshow tours all over Europe. Today, we pay a visit to Stockholm.
Welcome to Sweden and Svensk Tidskrift. My name is Ydstedt and I'm the chairman of Svensk Tidskrift, a foundation and a weekly political magazine. Svensk Tidskrift was founded in 1911 by two famous Swedish economists, Gösta Bagge, a conservative, and Elia Fleischer, a liberal. Today, 110 years later, we preserve the legacy as a liberal conservative voice. Svensk Tidskrift shows the way for individual freedom, free markets, the rule of law and democracy since 1911. In 2020, we published more than 350 essays on politics, economy and culture. We arrange seminars and we publish books on current issues. All our articles are available in our free online archive. We're also very happy to be a part of a network of international friends, such as Free Market Roadshow and the European Resource Bank. Welcome to Svensk Tidskrift.
And welcome to Sweden. I'm Amanda Wollstad, editor-in-chief of Svensk Tidskrift, the magazine, and I will be your moderator today. Intellectual property rights and patent rights is a question that is usually derided for being the protection of greedy and established companies over newcomers. As free market friends, of course, we know that this isn't right, but we don't always know why or the importance they actually have. I think especially after the last year, we need to be reminded, because when the pandemic was closing down the world in March 2020, I think none of us dared to dream that a year later we would already be in mass vaccination all over the globe. Who made that possible is medicinal companies, and they in their turn are made possible by patent right, because it's an extremely expensive business researching new medical inventions and vaccines and medical supplies. Many things can go wrong. A lot of their attempts never reach the market, and thus the ones that do reach the market need to fund further research to make further steps possible. And that will be partly the focus today. And I would like to start by introducing our keynote speaker, Timothy Lee, who is the Senior Vice President of Legal and Public Affairs for the Center for Individual Freedom, an Alexandria, Virginia-based nonprofit organization established in 1998 to protect constitutional rights, promote free market principles, and advance international liberty. Prior to that, Ms. Lee practiced labor and employment law and commercial litigation at law firms in Los Angeles, California, and Phoenix, Arizona area, including representing such worldwide firms as Morgan, Lewis and Bocuse LLP and Carlson Brady LLP. So welcome, and please play Mr. Lee's introductory speech.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Timothy Lee. I'm the Senior Vice President of Legal and Public Affairs for the Center for Individual Freedom, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak with regard to intellectual property and brand protection and patents, especially as it relates to the COVID crisis and the innovations that have been necessary to address that crisis. So thank you for this opportunity. This is a very passionate subject for me personally and for our organization. We believe very strongly in property rights, and what I'd like to speak about very briefly to you all is the value of property rights. It's not just something that I appreciate, but it's something that enhances fairness, and it's also something that enhances utility, which is obviously the primary concern of your organization. And so thank you again for having me and allowing me to speak on this topic. So first, I'd like to talk about fairness and why intellectual property is important in that regard. Just like it's fair for physical property to be held by the person who owns it, whether it's a car or a house or land that you have paid for, it's unfair for somebody else to just take that or use it for their own purposes. The same is true of intellectual property. If I invest billions of dollars on something to create a patent, or if I create a song, which is copyright, or if I come up with a trademark, which is also intellectual property, those are things in which I've invested. And if somebody else can just take them or appropriate them, that's not fair. And so I think most people can understand that point. Now, what's also important to note, though, is that, and along with your organization's ideals, intellectual property and patents specifically maximize utility and efficiency in human life. And so to give you just a couple of quick examples, the United States has some of the strongest patent and other intellectual property rights in the world. And as a result, we create almost 2/3 of new drugs introduced to the world each year, year after year. Our scientific innovations are due in large part, if not primary part, to patent protections and other intellectual property protections. They protect artists and innovators who invest the time necessary to come up with those innovations. The drug industry is a perfect example. Last year, we celebrated 40 years of what's known as the Bayh-Dole Act, which is named after 2 US senators. And The Economist magazine said that it is perhaps the most important piece of legislation passed in the United States over the past half century. The reason for that is what it did was expand patent rights for universities and nonprofit organizations and other groups that didn't exist before. And as a result, we went from about 400 patents for universities and similar organizations in 1980 when the act was passed to hundreds of thousands in the 40 years since then. And that has been particularly true of pharmaceuticals and drugs. And so it's important to note that it's not coincidence that nations like the United States or like Finland or other European nations that protect intellectual property more and patent rights more see more innovation, whereas nations rated very low in terms of protecting intellectual property like Venezuela or North Korea or similar nations like that don't see that sort of innovation. And so what you recognize quickly is that strong direct correlation between patent rights and innovation. Now, over the last year, we've seen that firsthand. I think most people understand across the world that creating a vaccine for a virus takes time. Typically, it takes about a decade, sometimes 15 years, and billions and billions and billions of dollars. But we were able to do this in 1 year, really less than 1 year. We're saving millions of lives across the world by these vaccines that were created in nations that protect patent rights. And so you can see that direct consequence, and I think people across the world can begin to understand, even if they never thought about this issue before, how important patent rights are to creation. And I think people seeing the vaccines coming out and saving lives and the decline in deaths that we're already recognizing can see firsthand why those strong patent rights ultimately led to the vaccine being created in less than 1 year for one of the world's deadliest pandemics. That is a perfect illustration of why patent rights are important and an illustration of how they lead to innovations of that sort. Now, what we begin to enter, though, is once those vaccines and drugs and other pharmaceutical innovations are created, sometimes groups that don't value intellectual property rights suddenly think that they're entitled to those, and they want to undermine patent rights in order to access those drugs. The problem with that is a lot of places across the country that don't, or excuse me, across the world that don't necessarily respect production requirements and safety requirements can't just be given the ingredients to those drugs and allowed to distribute themselves because they don't follow those. And so across the world, you're already seeing fake vaccines that attempted to be based on some of the vaccines created over the past year to end the COVID crisis. And they're either useless or ineffective, or they're actually harmful. And so we've got to be very, very careful about that. And so when people talk about brand protection, that's important for some of these groups and companies. And by the way, a lot of them have collaborated. It's very important to keep protecting that because those groups that we know are following safety standards in the manufacturing of these ideas that they came up with due to strong patent protections need to be allowed to carry forward on that. Now, you then get to the point of a lot of impoverished nations that don't have some of these strong patent protections and therefore haven't seen some of these innovations and therefore do not have a lot of these life-saving drugs available to them. The positive news there is the United States and other nations that do have these vaccines and have produced these cures and vaccines for the coronavirus and COVID pandemic are sharing them. Once we create them safely, that allows us to not only vaccinate our own populations, but to send them overseas. And just this week was yet another announcement by the United States government that it's going to be sharing those things. And so when people across the world begin to think that the answer to getting more vaccines and other life-saving drugs, whether that's during a pandemic or just dealing with ongoing life-saving issues, is to undermine patent rights, the exact opposite is true. All that will do is mean that some of these drugs and vaccines and other innovations don't get invented in the first place. Because why would I, as an inventor, invest all of that time and billions of dollars in creating something that can just be taken as soon as it's created? The better answer is what we're witnessing already, to strongly protect patent rights and other intellectual property, which leads to creation and innovation, just as we've seen with the vaccines for COVID, which then can be shared with other nations and impoverished peoples in order to vaccinate them as well. We are already seeing this before our very eyes. The alternative is to not protect patent rights or intellectual property, in which case these things won't be created in the first place. And so that's why it's important to strongly protect intellectual property rights. It serves the interests of fairness, because if I create something or if somebody innovates in some way, it's fair to reward their innovation and their hard work. But it also maximizes utility, as we're seeing before our very eyes. And across the decades, you can look back and see that nations that protect patents and other intellectual property see much more inventiveness and innovation. And now it's literally saving tens of millions of lives as we speak. And so the best way to move forward is to keep that system strong, protect it. With regard to Bayh-Dole, the act that was in 1980 here, we can't undermine it by allowing, whether domestically or abroad, people to disregard it and just march in and take drugs because they think that they're entitled to them or the price is too high. The better way to go about it is to keep doing what has worked in the past, and let's keep moving forward on that. We've got a lot more lives to save, and in the future, who knows what other innovations will come. But when they do come, they will come primarily because of strong patent and brand protection and other intellectual property protections. And so thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and we're seeing before our very eyes the miracle of human innovation, due in large part, if not primary part, to strong patent rights and other intellectual property rights and brand protections. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Timothy Lee, with a quite hopeful start of the day, I think. I would like to introduce our first panelist, Federico and Fernández, president of Fundación Internacional Bases in Rosario, Argentina, and a senior fellow with the Austrian Economic Centers in Vienna. He is also the president of the organizing committee of the International Conference, the Austrian School of Economics in the 21st Century, which has taken place every 2 years since 2006 in Rosario. Federico, please, can you give us our... There's no sound from Federico there. Just give us a moment and we'll see if we can work this out.
Now, can you hear me? So now I think it's fine. Well, hello again. Thank you, Amanda, for your kind introduction. I'm very happy to be sharing this panel with you and with Kajsa and Lorenzo. I think Timothy's keynote speech was great, very interesting. I took several notes, which I hope probably afterwards we'll be able to discuss. In any case, well, you mentioned, by the way, you mentioned the Austrian Economics Conference. Well, this year we are organizing the Austrian Conference in Vienna. So everyone who is interested in attending a magnificent event on Austrian economics should check austrianconference.org. But anyway, our panel is about innovation, IP, and brand protection. Timothy made a very good case for patents in medicine. We also have an expert on IP who is Lorenzo, and we have Kajsa who I suppose is an expert on medicine technology and the use of IP there. So I'll leave, let's say, the medical field to them. I don't want to do as Bill Gates has been doing these last couple of months, talking about issues in areas that probably I don't have the expertise. So I would like to go a little bit on brand protection and innovation particularly. And if you allow me, I would like to bring to your attention an example from Latin America, from which I think we can extrapolate many lessons for Europe and the rest of the world. What I want to discuss very briefly with you in 2-3 minutes is firstly, what Latin Americans think about innovation, brand protection, labeling food and other items with warnings, and on the other hand, what politicians and decision makers are doing about it. I think we'll find a very interesting gap there. So very quickly, let's start with innovation. Everything I'm going to tell you comes from a survey that Somos Innovación conducted in Latin America in 5 countries, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Mexico. And if whoever is interested, I can share the link of the study with you. It's a very interesting study published last year. According to this survey, 87% of Latin Americans consider innovation crucial for economic growth and for job creation. More than 80% claim that they are users of products and services that are based upon innovative ideas. 85% of Latin Americans believe that a democracy should encourage innovation because it brings more freedom of choice to the citizens. 75% of all the people polled across the region believe that the government should respect private intellectual property, and that innovators should be allowed to brand their products as they see fit. Even in the case of alcohol, which is, let's say, a sinful topic, 84% said that labels and brands should be up to the producer, how they are managed. So how are politicians and regulators responding to this? Are they, let's say, in tune with the desires and the rather liberal views of their constituencies. Some of the examples that I'm going to mention come from Chile, others, but many things similar can be found in Mexico, country that is, by the way, now trying basically to mimic everything that is happening in Chile. Several things are at least being discussed in Argentina and in other countries. So this is a regional phenomenon. Of course, everything regarding the attack to brands and how producers can present their products started with cigarettes. And I mean, in a way with a good reason. Cigarettes, as we all know, are not the best you can do for your health. In any case, and we can discuss about this maybe later or another time, plain packaging for cigarettes is probably not the best idea, but regardless, it started with that, and we all know it. Cigarettes, basically have no labels, and they have these horrible images of people dying. But in a country like Chile, but this is happening in other places, we are now starting to see that this is, there's like a trickle-down effect, and this is moving to completely different areas. Of course, now, for instance, cookies have warning labels because of all the dangerous things they can bring. I've seen a picture of a 40-gram chocolate chip cookie that had 3 huge warning labels. It's one label per 13 grams. That's probably a world record. Even soups in Chile, the dehydrated soups have warning labels now. Of course, one horrible example is that, we all know Kellogg's cereals and the famous Tony the Tiger. Well, Tony the Tiger passed away in Chile. He's not there anymore because he's been replaced, by the way, by warning labels. I always think of poor parents who have to explain to their children why Tony the Tiger is not there anymore. I don't know. They'll tell them, yeah, Tony died. The Minister of Health killed him. But really, it's a very ridiculous situation. And we started with cigarettes, and now we are moving forward to cereal and soups. So, and with this I'll conclude. What we've seen regarding brands is that, this very bad intervention, this paternalistic instincts by the governments and by bureaucrats have grown as an oil stain. They started with cigarettes, and now they have reached basically everything. And if they could, they would reach literally everything. They would find that water has some, impure properties, and they would, label it as well. And to wrap up, I think the Latin American example, and this is why I brought the data from this survey, shows us that on the one hand, we have the civil society that want to live their lives in peace. They are very happy that producers and innovators are trying to win their favor through the free markets and offering their services. And on the other hand, we have bureaucrats and decision makers who believe that they are our surrogate parents, and they want to tell us what to do. If this schism, if this gap is not closed, what we are going to find is that we are having a very big problem, because it's a substantial part of innovation that entrepreneurs can present their products in the way they want. And if this is not the case anymore, innovation itself will be at risk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Federico, for a very interesting presentation and very interesting figures. I will quickly move on, so we have time for a panel discussion to our next panelist. Lorenzo Montanari is an international programs manager at Americans for Tax Reform and executive director of Property Right Alliance, an advocacy group affiliated to RTR for the protection of physical and intellectual property rights, both domestically and internationally. While at Property Rights Alliance, he is in charge of publishing the International Property Rights Index, an international comparative study focusing on intellectual and physical property rights. Lorenzo, very welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you, Amanda, for the introduction, and thanks, of course, to Anders and Barbara Kolm for the Free Market Roadshow. I completely agree with the presentation of Timothy Lee, and of course with my friend Federico. So as you mentioned, Property Rights Alliance is an advocacy and research group based in Washington, D.C. with the main goal to promote and advocate for the protection of property right, intellectual property right, and rule of law, and also free trade innovation all over the world. We founded PRA in 2005, while in 2007 we start publishing the International Property Right Index in partnership with Hernando de Soto, and we have been working with Professor Sara Levi-Karsiente since as the author of the index since 2015. But also, let me say that in 2019, we also start a new index, the International Trade Barrier Index, created and authored by Philip Thompson, is our colleague. While recently, last Monday, April 26, we launched the update version of the Trademark and Patent Index, co-authored by Krisa Kazakov, that is our PRA fellow, and in partnership with Professor Park from the American University. And I would say we launched last Monday was a perfect day because it was the World IP Day, and it was a great opportunity to celebrate the important role played by IP. In fact, as every year, Property Rights Alliance ran an international coalition letter to celebrate the World IP Day and the importance of IP. And I want to also, of course, thanks to all our partners. This year we were able to collect 101 signatures, more than almost 50 countries represented. And I want to thank Barbara Kolm, Federico, Anders for their support of the letter, and of course, all our partners. Our international activity and advocacy efforts are basically possible thanks to this outstanding network of more than 120 think tanks that we are able to work with them in a very horizontal way and promote and advocate to everyone the importance of property rights and IP. It is more than 1 year ago since the World Health Organization declared the COVID-19 outbreak a global pandemic. A pandemic that affected human life and global economy. In less than a year since the outbreak started, researchers, private sector, and in some cases, partnership with the public sector as well, were able to discover valuable vaccine, crucial to save life and, with, of course, to end the pandemic, hopefully very soon. These results are facts that highlight the fundamental role played by intellectual property rights in saving life. And basically, it is exactly the opposite message that countries such as India and South Africa try to push and to advocate. These countries are advocating for the IP wave. And they did petitioning last fall 2020, the WTO TRIPS Council. Let me say that it is difficult to innovate without the protection of ideas. We need to contrast the IP wave proposed by South African, Indian, plus 100 developing countries, because there is no evidence that overriding intellectual property rights will contribute in a better distribution of vaccines. Intellectual property rights, including trademarks and patents, encourage creative activity for the benefit of the free society. Innovation are protected through IP, and inventor effort an opportunity to derive fair return from their investment. In fact, the acquisition of intellectual property right is one of the primary tools for incentivizing creators in a modern economy. Our property right index finds an almost perfect correlation of 0.92 when comparing property right protection overall with the global biotech innovation index. As well as our property right index scores show the country with a strong protection of property right have a per capita income almost 16 times of the country with weak protection. Robust intellectual property right protection are associated with the de-risking of type of long-term capital-intensive investment needed to pioneer breakthrough innovation. To conclude, it is simple like that. No IP, no vaccine, no life saved. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. And I would like to introduce our third panelist. Kajsa Wilhelmsson is the CEO of Oxford Health System Reform Group Limited, as well as a lay member of the Oxford University Medical Science Interdivisional Research Ethics Committee. That's a very long title. She has previously been an executive vice president of Edelman, building their A&R health policy and access offer, vice president external affairs for the health consumer powerhouse, as well as held position within Baxter World Trade, HELA, a Swedish trade association for private healthcare, and has held several positions as an elected politician on country and council level. So Kajsa, please give us the medical field's opinion.
I will only give my own opinion on this, but I will do that based on my experience from having worked in most parts of the healthcare sector throughout my life. I do agree IP rights is an essential driver of health innovation, but I do find the topic less than straightforward. Partly, of course, because the pharma industry's history of evergreening. I now think that the last week's launch of the IP Principles for Advancing Cures and Therapies, IP Pact, signed off by most companies, means that there will be less of use of legal loopholes to ensure market exclusivity beyond what was intended by the legislative authorities. Now, evergreening aside, there are two other issues I'd like to discuss. First of all, medicines today are in some cases brought to market partly by the use of public funding, i.e. my tax money. So who should have IP rights? The second concerns the uneven access to knowledge about biomedical science due to the terms of peer-reviewed research publications. It's easy to think of innovation as something that comes about in terms of a nerd sitting alone or with his friend in dad's garage hacking code. That's admittedly been the case with many of today's most successful innovations. However, as with most diseases, coronavirus, for example, wasn't exactly unknown before the outbreak. A lot of research and knowledge had already been done, both by private, but primarily by public institutions. So when the pandemic hit, all pharma companies, as well as academic researchers, looked at what's in their work, research or products, that could be in what industry called repurposed. So what I'm trying to say is that the ability to bring vaccine and also medical treatment quickly to market depends on being able to efficiently make new discoveries. And today that means building on current knowledge, both with regards to ingredients and product techniques. You need IP rights, but the COVID vaccine are all built by more than 200 different ingredients. This is where open access to scientific literature is key. And the fee levels are enormous hurdles for both smaller companies and academics. Now, from our side of the political spectrum, you might think that it's up to the publisher to charge the fee, but in medicine, you're basically forced to publish in them to pass the regulatory system, which is a governmental system. And when companies, unlike in most cases universities, isn't allowed by the journals to buy open access to their studies, is to me like if you go into a store who's been given a monopoly by the state, and then you are not being allowed to buy things there because you have a certain hair color, i.e. a certain type of vendor. And the system is recognized both by governments and pharma industry to hamper the ecosystem for innovation today. Modernization is needed so that we, for example, can use AI in systematic literature review. The other component I find complicated is who actually deserve to hold the IP rights to a discovery. When a person, the true innovator, and when is it simply their job? Is someone working for a company, the company gets the IP rights. Straightforward enough. But if the person works for an academic institution funded by tax money, now, as Lee referred to, US universities do get their royalties because they do get the IP rights. But in Europe, it's different. And for example, the Swedish Royal School of Technology make a point of not taking any royalties on IP rights on products innovated there. With regards to healthcare, this is specifically troublesome for me, as the innovation I funded with my tax money, then in production, are being bought back again with my tax money. I pay twice. Austrian HTA agency have tried to create a methodology for assessing exactly how much of research investments have been paid by the company and how much have been paid by tax money. Their model is seriously flawed. I wouldn't use it, but it's a start, and I do think more thinking needs to go into the area. It's like with the cooperation between the public institution Oxford University General Institute and the company AstraZeneca, then supported by grants from several countries as well as the European Commission, Boris Johnson concluded that this success was made possible due to greed. I think he's right, and I think that is morally just and also practically the best way forward. I just want to be a bit more greedy when it comes to my tax money. And I think these are two topics that need to be discussed for the public to perceive IP rights as fair and to trust the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Kajsa, from for a slightly different perspective. Let me see, I can understand the system here. I will simply start with asking a few questions of my own, because I am the moderator and I can do that. If our beloved audience would like to ask questions, you can do so on, I think, the YouTube live feed. Please do. We do have quite a while left for discussions. So let me check my notes. Kajsa, let's start with you. What do you think would be a working model? Do you think one could be worked out? You talked as a model that did try to figure out how much funding was private and how much funding was public was deeply flawed, but is that type of model a way forward? Or do you have any idea how to work this out? Kajsa, we can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. It might be simpler to go the American way in ensuring that universities are getting IP protection for instead of having their researchers privately seek IP protection so that they get royalties, i.e. invest back into the universities. I do think that is how it works with the Jenner Institute and the AstraZeneca vaccines, because that IP right actually now is in a separate company that is a spin-off from the university that in turn will be public on the New York Stock Exchange. And so what I am having a bit of an issue is that Swedish tax monies goes down into both medical and technological research, and then the researchers gets the IP rights and the royalties for the innovation, and the tax monies get nothing in return, absolutely zero. That is not the case in the US. That's one way forward. The other one is, and I think that is much more troublesome, the Austrian model where you try to pay in accordance with investment. I think you should pay for medicine because of how much good they do, not how much money you have spent on them.
Thank you. That is certainly an interesting perspective. Lorenzo, you were talking about a very strong correlation between property rights and, well, pretty much a lively and functioning society, a strong biomedical sector, and also a national income. If this evidence is so overwhelming, why are we still having this discussion?
Well, thank you for the question. And well, I think is, of course, this enduring debate about IP and innovation. What we want to describe with our index, just showing how the correlation works and how, in which way the role played by intellectual property right. But also overall the copyright system. When we say copyright system in our index, we include the legal political environment. That means judicial independence, rule of law, political stability, control of corruption, included with the physical property right and the IP. For IP, in our index, we do the IP perception among the people in terms of protection, copyright piracy, and patent protection. And starting for the next edition, 2021, we will include also the trademark segment. With our correlation, we want to demonstrate that IP are a good partner of humanity. Let's put in this way, because if we less than 1 year able to get the vaccine is because the strong and also fair IP protection according to the different international agreement. We wouldn't be able to reach this type of with a short time vaccine without this IP protection. So the correlation with the Global Biotech Innovation Index demonstrate and confirm that what we show in our index is extremely important for research and inventor, and also the IP is the fair reward for everyone is investing in this sector. I mean, we need to remember that basically the drug development process span an average between 12 to 15 years, as also Timothy was mentioning in his presentation. And of those rare few which make it to clinical testing, less than 12% are ultimately approved by, in this case, in the US, by the FDA. So this means that there is a lot of money invested, and I think the perfect reward is to be able to get the vaccine and the pandemic in very quickly. The debate about the IP wave is a debate that every time there is an outbreak or health pandemic is always back on the first stage, but it's kind of weird to see that a country like India, that they're basically the country that the world producer of vaccine, they're moving forward in this direction. South Africa, I'm not surprised, because if we know a little bit about South Africa, we know that the current government are pushing different policy reform that won't affect the entire system of the property right. In South Africa, they want to abolish the Article 25 of the Constitution that basically protect physical property right, but also they want to reform the overall idea of the IP protection. So this is kind of this IP wave request is more led by a free ride ideology rather than the real wave to to find a solution to the pandemic. So there are different tools to fix the problem of vaccine for all. IP licensing is one of that. And we see that Gilead, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, and Pfizer, they use the IP licensing. Gilead, for example, AstraZeneca reached a licensing and a technology transfer agreement with India, with the Serum Institute, to manufacture 1 billion vaccine doses for low and middle income country, and so on, Johnson and Pfizer. So it's more an ideological debate from my point of view, rather than a global health debate. There are tools that can easily be reached legally without breaching, overriding the intellectual property right protection.
Thank you. And we have an audience question. What are the limits to IP? How long should they last? And should they be universal or differ per industry? Anyone feel up to the challenge? Lorenzo, maybe this is your area. Would you like to continue?
Well, I mean, even in this case, it's an eternal debate about how long should it last. I mean, patent IP, I would say as long as is for the private sector is good to get investment back, basically. So IP need to be protected in a free trade agreement. This is one of the issues that's been part of the new UMCA. When under the Trump administration, they renegotiate the protection with the new NAFTA. But this is an eternal debate. So it's not a matter of number, it's a matter of quality of protection.
I could add on this.
Yes, Kajsa.
I don't think it is necessarily a question of how long it lasts. We see now that products shift so quickly, go from one to another. So actually, today you need to recoup your investment before you actually have lost your IP rights, even in pharmaceuticals. It's helpful because you can invest in more research if you manage to hold it longer. And this is why for orphan drug, they actually are given a longer market exclusivity than in regular blockbuster drugs. But I think it's a question isn't how long you should have IP rights, but make sure that they are easy to understand. Smaller companies can apply easily and globally, preferably, and also making sure that you don't create monopolies like those that the peer-reviewed publication sits on today, which literally hinders innovation, as you can't use AI, for example, within research literature.
Do we have any more audience questions, Vienna? Not so far. Please ask your questions in the chat by the YouTube live show, and we can keep on those discussions. I have questions. I always have questions, so we're not going to run out, but it would be nice if someone else would have something to say about this. Let me just check my notes. Federico, back to your discussion about how it all started with tobacco, and this is a discussion we've had in Svensk Tidskrift as well. Do you think this is sort of the salami tactics, that defending tobacco is hard because everyone agrees that tobacco is not good for you? By starting by that sort of, is it easier to push through legislation that would otherwise be incite a bigger reaction?
Thanks, Amanda. Yes, I think, yeah, please. I mean, it's not that I wanted to defend tobacco or anything like that, but the issue that I wanted to point is exactly what you said, is that it started with tobacco. Now it has reached soups and cereal. So, and really, in the future, only God knows, and regulators. So that's really the key issue, is how the ability of entrepreneurs, of innovators to present their products to the public is being limited to a very serious level. And the other thing that we also should bear in mind is that brands are not just like a statement of fashion or something like that. For instance, you can see that this, for me, it's not only that, it's an iPhone, it's a seal of quality in many ways. It's the same that when you buy certain brand for a shirt or for a dress, you expect a certain result, and the brand makes an effort for you to get that. If those things are erased, the quality of the products that we may receive can definitely decline. And of course, you start going into issues that have to do with counterfeiting, with several things that are extremely dangerous, particularly to consumers. So, and with this I finish, all these attacks on brands end up hurting not only the producers, but the consumers that they are supposed to protect.
We have an audience question from Scott Nelson. How would you characterize the development of IP rights over the past few years? Are they improving or backsliding in particular industries, in particular countries, etc.? And I think our panel have very interesting and different experience with this, being from different geographic areas and different fields. So I would like you all to answer this one in turn. Should we start with Lorenzo?
Well, according to our index, starting from 2018, so 2018-20, we see a slow decline in protection of overall the property right as well as IP. I would say that the stronger component stay on the physical property right, but we see there is a slow decline in the protection of IP. This is not a good news. We are talking about very percentage number in our index, but it shows us the trend. It's a bit negative in one way. In one way, we can explain this decline also with the increase of the counterfeit product. I'm glad that Federico brought up the concept of the bad policy of plain packaging, because it's completely tied to illicit trade and counterfeit product. It's much easier to counterfeit cigarette that don't have, or any type of other product that don't have a clear brand, that basically are defended. So plain packaging is an attack to the trademark system. Let's put it this way. It's not protecting health, it is an attack to the trademark system. And because of illicit trade and the counterfeit, as Federico mentioned, it will be affected also at the end of the consumer. So we can see some data. According to United States Trade Representative, the flow of counterfeit goods across border continue to increase, rising from 45 million in 2000 to a massive 1.4 billion in 2018. So this is a data that are pretty scary in one way, and they explain why the raising of the counterfeit product will affect in the long term our health and overall the IP system. Just to give a couple of numbers more, between United States and European Union, more than almost 150 million jobs are related to IP industry. 38% of the European GDP are tied to the IP intensive industry, 40% in the US. So we are talking about a big number, and in which way IP are playing in a good way in our economy, an important role. So fighting plain packaging means also fighting counterfeit good and fighting illicit trade.
Kajsa?
I think it's sort of, it's been a downhill voyage for a long time for pharmaceuticals, simply because of the lack of respect for, and the hope that by allowing companies to do replica innovation, you can then not have to invest in healthcare. It's a way of getting around the basic need for investing in healthcare. I think that with now, as we see that more and more countries start to realize that it isn't sustainable to put 3.7% of their GDP into health, it has to be more. It costs more to keep for. It also means that we see an involvement of government. So I think it actually is, we're coming to conclusions and agreement, which gives me hope. But we are not there yet, but it also lays on the industry and the US and European governments to simplify the whole IP right system, so that smaller companies from Asia, from Latin America, and also our own countries it's easier for them to get into the market and defend their rights.
And Federico?
I won't have a better answer than Kajsa and Lorenzo. I was surprised by the numbers Lorenzo mentioned about counterfeit products. Those were shocking. I was also very intrigued by Kajsa's on her opening statement, what she mentioned about how universities should deal with the IP that their professors or researchers create. And that's extremely interesting. And I mean, the only thing I could add in relation to that, to this final question or this last question, is maybe we could think, at least, of course, with a lot of prudence, because particularly in the area of pharmaceuticals, I know that, let's say, playing with IP can be quite dramatic in its results. But maybe we could try to find smaller solutions. I'm thinking of things similar to regulatory sandboxes. Try in a small scale, for instance, in the case that Kajsa mentioned of universities, let different universities try different systems to see what happens. Maybe a university saying, hey, if you come and do research for me, you get the IP of wherever you discover. Another university saying, no, all the professors that do research for us, we as university will get the IP, but I don't know, you'll be better paid or whatever. Or small things like that, and try and let competition, which we all know, competition tied to private property is like the best way to arrive to good results. Maybe to see to try to find slowly what are the best ways to deal with these issues.
I think we have time for one last audience question. It is somewhat leading, but it fits right into what Lorenzo was just talking about. Is China really breaking international IP laws in recent times, or is this Western propaganda? And if so, what should the international be as to fairness? Lorenzo, please.
Well, overall, China is is one of the biggest hub in terms of counterfeit, fake product. But we need to be honest that China is moving forward in slowly, but in the right direction in improving IP protection. It's a big country, so I guess it's difficult to control everything, even if it is a dictatorship. But we see that in term of patent, China is also, I would say, leading in terms of, let's say, patent in force. United States is almost more than 3 million in terms of patent in force. China is 2,670,000, followed by Japan, Korea, and Germany. So there are positive trends, but again, I agree that with the current administration and the previous administration that they raised the point that China need to change their regime and they need to stop stealing IP overall to the European Union and United States in general, North America in general. But in one way, according to our index, we see that there is some improvement, and this is good news, and we welcome China to join fully and to implement fully the agreement that in part they also signed.
One quick question, and I think this goes to Kajsa. Many of the sectors of economy are very innovative without having a strong IP rights. Think open source in the IT sector. Could IP rights be a hindrance to innovation sometimes?
Innovation, yes, but you're not bringing to market. That's the tricky point when it comes to, you can innovate. The Jenner Institute, again, is a good example. They had the vaccine ready, but they didn't have the skills for how to bring the product to market. The AstraZeneca vaccine could never have been brought to market by the Jenner Institute. It could be innovated by them because the enormous complexity of setting up clinical trials, and we all know that AstraZeneca had real struggles. They were almost not approved because initially their trials were set up the wrong way by the academics. So, and then when you then negotiate production to scale up on the level you need to now, you need to have IP rights so that you can go to, as they have done, to several other pharma companies and ask them in their sites to produce without risk of having them draw benefit of that innovation. So yes, innovate maybe, but not bring to market. That's the difference.
And we all know in the end it has to be brought to market to exist. I think that brings our discussion to an end. Thank you very much to our panelists. You have given us a lot to think about. And in the end, I think it is a quite hopeful discussion. As we spoke about earlier, we do have vaccines that we thought we were going to have to wait for decades. And in the end, the human innovation and equity gives hope, both for us to get out of this pandemic relatively soon, I hope, but also to resume life as it should be when this is all over. And I sincerely hope next year I will see you all in Stockholm and we can end the discussion with a glass of wine. Today, I hope you take a glass of wine at home and share for the free market. And I thank you so much for joining us. And I would also like to tell our audience that you can keep listening to these interesting discussions tomorrow, May 4th, when FMRS Tuzla is at 5 p.m. hosted by Multi. There's a keynote by Philip Bagos, and the discussion will center around COVID-19 and the political economy of mass hysteria. Please don't miss that. And thank you so much for joining us tonight, next year in Stockholm.
Thank you so much.